Question: if you picked someone right from the streets, how do you get someone into coding? If you told me exactly what I am a wizard. But in real life, I would say that I am a college student taking a dentistry course who makes funny 3D art on the internet during my off time while dressed up as a poorly drawn wizard creature. Despite living in a country that lives most of its life on social media, I'm not really the kind of person that would really break open my computer and mess around with its code. That would be terrifying. And I think the same holds true for most people who has no idea how the inner mechanisms of our modern technology works. They would just be satisfied with letting their Windows computer be as it is. And if they really want things to be safe for them, they will own an Apple device. So how is it that after 3 years of testing out different programming languages that I got into computer coding? Hi, my name is Morgan Osborne, and this is another episode of me sharing some of my strange and obscure hobbies. And in this episode, we are talking about the story of how I got into learning computer programming. Before I tell you my story, I think it is best to understand that before I took on this task, I did not really know what I can do with computer coding. There was, I think, a show called Mr. Robot wherein a schizophrenic person gets to do all of these criminal activities with a gang while writing some dramatic shit on his computer terminal. And I thought that it was really cool. I wanted to be the person that also confuses the shit out of people when I showed them my computer screen. So I looked around the internet figuring out what the heck this is supposed to do. Turns out, computer code is used to make the apps, websites, and games we use on our devices. Well, no shit, Sherlock. However, one thing that's never cleared is how we turn text into things that we can actually use. With the benefit of hindsight, I already know that we cannot just learn C# to make a game. You need to find a game engine. You also cannot just learn HTML and CSS to make a website. You need services like GitHub Pages or GeoCities to host your sites for you. And if you want users to contribute to your website, like making comments, you may need to fork up some money to get a physical server running on your room. For someone taking a CS50 course in Harvard, this may probably be a common thing to know about, but as someone who is approaching this as a hobby and no background knowledge, this isn't really obvious. And it is the reason why even up to now, I still do not know the extent to which code can help me in making things I want to make in the future, like apps or games. So why did I start learning coding if I do not know what to make with it? Well, I just thought that it was cool. Aside from sci-fi media and thrillers on Netflix, social media made it so that anyone who's participating in the Silicon Valley is given lots of attention and praise. And why wouldn't they? In other words, I did not learn coding because I found inherent value from it. The reason why I did it was because other people liked it, and I wanted to be the person that was liked for doing said action. And this, dear strangers, is the reason that came to bite me back in the future. So where the crap do I start? Well, back then, it was the year of our Lord 2022, so everything was pretty much on the internet. And what do you know, before I can even type anything down, YouTube recommended me a free CS50 course from Harvard. Girl must have known that I have just finished season 1 of Mr. Robot. Whenever I look at articles and tutorials online on how to get into computer science without applying for a degree, this is the course that people say is essential. It is free, complete, and available right here on YouTube. So I clicked on the video and holy shit, it's more than 24 hours long. Okay, this is fine. I mean, I'm fully dedicated to learning the skills, so I'm definitely going to finish this. Right? Alright, before I criticize this course, I might as well give my positive remarks on this class. Looking back, Harvard does a great job at introducing me to how coding works through the use of the Scratch programming language, the idea of a computer being made of these multiple switches that when combined turns into a more complex action for your computer, and the basic concepts of variables, conditional statements, and functions. I think. You see, aside from the fact that my attention span is very short, the course does suffer from what most college courses suffer from. focusing too much on the theoretical aspect of computer coding. You can relate if you are in a STEM course that whenever you have a subject that's split into lecture and lab, your performance in the lecture occupies a higher percentage in terms of what determines your final grade in said subject. It is not only evident in computer science courses in college, it is also evident in the way teachers teach. The first few hours is spent on learning how to read and write in C language, a useful language to start off with if we're talking about something that is used for general purposes, and not going to deny that these lessons do come in handy as we sink deeper and deeper in writing in Visual Studio Code. But as I'm watching it through, I had to ask, what is this used for? How do I apply these lessons to make something that's much more concrete? Again, I'm not saying that it totally was a waste of time, but most courses like the CS50 course approaches teaching in a way that you already have a definite goal in mind that you can apply with the lessons that they teach. However, just like a high school student picking a college course that will define them for the rest of their life, I do not have that set goal to work with. It's not a problem with concepts, but a problem of application. So instead of pondering about the actual lessons itself, I'm still stuck with that one big question. What do I do with this? I never finished the CS50 course. I had a Blender YouTube channel to run, a dental course to complete, and 2 Asian parents to satisfy. I had to make room for my busy schedule, so I stopped learning code for the meantime to focus on other things. Nonetheless, it did not take a long time for me to get into the rabbit hole of YouTube recommendations, and a video popped into my timeline. A video about making video games. This is around the late half of 2022, and by this point I have made a couple of 3D art and 3 animated shorts in Blender. With the release of my hit short, Feather, Snowflake, and the Christmas Gift, I thought that the next evolution to making animations would be to make video games. I mean, I already know how to model, make 3D assets, and even do simple animations using rigs. How hard can making video games be if I already know this much? I began searching for a game engine. And the first game engine I used to make games was not Unity, surprisingly, even if I had used it in the past to make 3D VTuber models. No, the first program I used was Godot. The fact that it was lightweight intrigued me. It used its own custom-made language called GDScript, which was much easier to learn than the default programming language for most game engines, C#. So I learned a bit and got into coding, before I eventually lost motivation and stopped again. You see, here's the main issue. Even though my goal is much more definite now than when I started taking the CS50 course, I'm not really a passionate gamer at that time. Right now, sure, I am. Just look at how long my Harvest Moon streams are on YouTube, and my constant stories of my ongoings of old GBA and DS games like Friends of Mineral Town, Metroid, and Fire Emblem. But before, things were different. After a lot of playing old Flash games on the computer when I was a little boy, the Android and Apple boom came into the picture, and I tried to get into some games in the Google Play Store like Xenonia and Mobile Legends Bang Bang. Oh no. If you ever played a game back then in the App Store, you know how infuriating the pay-to-win structure of these games can be. Take a game like Xenonia, a top-down RPG that has a difficulty curve that gets extremely high at the later part of the game that you had to spend some IRL money to get upgrades for your character. Your gaming experience starts to suck exponentially, especially if you like the idea of steady but consistent progress. Also, I'm not a fan of MOBA games, or any competitive multiplayer game in general. Why? Well, I'm a sore loser that does not take L's lightly, and if you see my win-loss rate on all of my matches, you can see that most of my time is spent waiting for the clock to run out and desperately trying to defend an enemy swarm because the opponent team had a good run early on in the match. Do I call watching a slow car crash happen a good time? I don't think so, asshole. Sorry, my Southeast Asian toxicity for Mobile Legends just leaked out, but the point is that my passion for gaming died long ago with the death of the golden age of Newgrounds. It was only a little after discovering retro gaming, owning a Nintendo Switch, and looking into indie games that I finally jumped back into the hobby. But that is not yet where we are in the story. Remember that it is 2022, and my heart was just not into it as much as writing and making stories. The passion that pushed me to make my animated shorts on YouTube in the first place. Now you can say that if I was into making stories, then make a story-driven game. But as I researched more into it, writing for games is different from writing for movies, videos, and animation. And you still had to make a game around the narrative, which isn't what I want to spend my time on that much. So, just like the CS50 course from before, I uninstalled Godot and moved on to other projects. I think it's also fair to mention that I did eventually get back to game development through Unity. Since it was already pre-installed in my computer when I made 3D VTuber models with it, I decided to extend my use of it to making games. I learned C# for the first time, and I eventually made a game with it on Newgrounds called Helibird, which you can still play right now. The controls suck and the graphics were made using GIMP, but it's complete for the most part. But I'm still not that passionate about game dev, so I didn't really seek to improve after this experience and left my game dev journey at a standstill. Yet, I couldn't say that it was a huge waste of time. From this experience, I learned about libraries and how in this industry, it is common knowledge to borrow and reuse code from other people to save time and resources. Do you know about those scenes in movies wherein programmers type multiple words in their screen to make up lines of code? That is a fantasy. Most coders prefer the simple Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V method to get shit done quickly. It's also from this experience I learned that there is no universal coding language that can be used to make anything you want. For example, C# is for games, Python is for data science and collecting data, and JavaScript is for making websites. It was a heavy revelation for me because I thought that all it took was one language to make me a computer whiz, but the truth had to set in. While I was learning how to code games, something in the Blender app caught my attention. Its scripting features. Whenever you open a new project in the program, a list of tabs are created right away, and one of these tabs was named Scripting. Curious about what it does, I looked into it online, and it turns out Blender has its own Python API? What the fuck? What can this program not do? While I don't really understand what an API really is, the Blender Python API is a tool to make custom add-ons and tools for the program. Think of your IVGen add-on that automatically makes vines for you, or the Tessellate add-on that turns your meshes into wicker baskets. These are things that are made using this feature that's barely talked about, and I was interested. A tool that makes me tools for a hobby that I'm already doing for the longest time? Why would I want to pass this on? So I looked into some tutorials, and after writing a bunch of stuff for the terminal and making a simple working add-on, something was not sitting right with me. Even if I'm making some significant progress, I didn't have that drive to discover more about the Blender Python API. And after thinking about it, I finally understood why. Blender is already too efficient as a program. With just its vanilla build, you get 3D modeling tools, texturing tools, shading tools, geometry nodes for procedural 3D rendering, a whole compositing system, an asset library for past projects, and so much more. And don't get me started on the add-ons already made for this program. The community is just too strong. My only complaint I had that I think could be fixed with add-ons is one that fixes the clutter of its complicated user interface. But by the time you're deep into learning about the Blender Python API, why would you think that this is a problem? My problem is that I had no problems, and learning how to code for this specific area does not feel very necessary for me to do. However, that's not to say that this was a waste of time either. Aside from learning another programming language, while looking into coding for Blender, I realized that I had unintentionally learned coding before I even took that CS50 class from before. To explain, there are these two features in Blender called shader nodes and geometry nodes. Probably one of the hardest tools in Blender to learn, nodes are a system introduced in Blender that controls how models are rendered in the 3D viewport. How it works is that you first create an input node that the programmers out there is the variables that you want to manipulate. From here, you add other nodes that link together. These nodes will differ varyingly. Some may function like conditional statements in the form of selective nodes that control which points of the model will be manipulated by your nodes, while others carry a specific function to them that perform an action onto your render. If you are feeling spicy, you can add math or vector math nodes that lets you perform mathematical equations, and when you are done, you link it to an output node that transforms your node system into something that you can see in the viewport. From this example alone, you can kind of see Blender's node system to be a form of visual scripting language, like Scratch, but intended more for 3D rendering purposes. From a beginner, this is an awesome revelation for me. It is sometimes hard to imagine the concept of local and global scoping, the idea of which variables you can use on all functions, and which can only be used on a specific function in your code. But with visual scripting in mind, I learned that coding works in a cause and effect relationship. Like a story, even if the individual elements of your story would be correct, the order to which you write your lines will have a grave effect on how the code can be interpreted. So, learning how to organize code is helpful, and how I was able to improve on that skill was by thinking more of my code as interconnected nodes. I'm getting closer and closer to understanding how I should read and write code. But the problem still remains that I don't know how to apply code into making actual things that I want to make. And it came to be that I was going to give up coding for the better until my dental course started teaching me something terribly useless. Alright, before I talk about my story, can I just inform people that juxtaposed to the practical skills you learn in a medical course like mine, they let you do all of these extracurricular activities and minor subjects on the side that has nothing to do with your course. History? No, I don't need to know that we used to pull teeth in the past for one semester. Art appreciation and philosophy? We have YouTube video essays for that. Zoology? The only animals I want to study are the people making the curriculum for this course. Rizal? A mandatory subject in all courses in the Philippines where we study a national hero who died by writing 2 twit-longers against the Spanish, but props to my professor for not giving a damn and turning it into a silly karaoke session for a final exam. It's a frustrating first few years of college, but one minor class in 2023 that did not feel much of a mistake was my Internet of Things class. Named after a concept introduced in the 90s that talked about how devices will be more interconnected in the future before Apple fumbled that by changing its USB ports sometime in the 2010s, the class was less about that and more so about building websites, making branching diagrams to explain how the code would work for a hypothetical program you made up, and making a product or service plan that applies all the lessons technology we learned in this class. This is far from what I expect from a dental course, and I was entertained seeing my classmates get confused like I was when I first learned coding for the first time. But I was not confused at all. I had past experience with this, so I took it as a challenge to show these noobs how a person with too much free time can do with this clunky addition to our curriculum. That's not to say that there weren't any setbacks. We had to still discuss about hardware stuff like sensors and monitors used in a specific field like dentistry, which definitely weren't part of my software-driven self-learning sessions. But when we got into making a branching tree to explain a bunch of code for a group project, I pretty much soloed that myself and carried my team to a high grade. However, for the midterms, a task that caught my attention was all about making a website. We weren't learning any coding language, so my teacher told us to go to WordPress and try to make a website out of that. And after taking a Coursera course provided by my college, I got to know the hosting platform's features and began working on a website for myself. Since I was lazy in coming up with a new idea, I decided to make a website for my YouTube channel, the Vanillalog, where I can compile all of my music, art, and animations. When I started, I didn't know how flexible this system of making websites would be, but after playing around with it, I started to get hooked into the activity. I started adding more elements, more web pages, more buttons, until I came up with this first version of the modern Vanillalog website. I did make a couple of websites to showcase my work in my channel before, but I never crafted it to a level of detail to this extent. It was still a little lacking with things because of how clunky WordPress's website building interface can be, but it is enough to make my professor say to me, "Wow, you should have taken an IT course instead." After this experience, a couple of months have passed, and I worked on improving more of my Blender skills while also trying to improve on my newfound hobby of making DAW music. As a result, I released Candlewick, my first 2.5D animated film using my own created soundtrack, and Medical Students, my second music album compiling all of my tunes I made in 2024. Things were scaling up in terms of the things I'm already working on in this channel. But that experience of making a website for my class had not left my mind, and I guess YouTube recommended was also noticing my nostalgia because it then recommended to me a video about the indie web. You've probably heard of this term before if you are a person who disliked the corporate product slop we've been getting recently, so I'll make this explanation short. Indie is a term to describe anything that was independently made without the help of big companies funding it, and the indie web is a collection of websites around the internet that are run by hobbyists sharing whatever they want using their own created code. It's also used to describe a community of people who are just having fun making web pages and content that is free from the terms and services provided by social media platforms. As someone learning about the indie web for the first time, the passion and dedication surrounding this community is infectious. They may be making weird-looking static websites that have questionable PNG shrines, but make no mistake that when they make something for their website, they are not usually doing it to garner an audience. This is a website for them, by them. To give you an idea of what I mean, when looking through the indie web on my live streams using Wibby and the NeoCities pages, I stumbled upon 5 people dedicated to documenting their process in making an oscillator. What is an oscillator? I have no idea, but the way they get into detail about it makes me ponder about the nature of the human mind. Of course, I eventually found people who are interested in the same things as me. There are people who share their 3D art, people who like making music, people who share their love for retro games, and people who make reviews of obscure books, TV shows, and other forms of media. I start to realize that to most people in this community, they're basically bloggers, putting their hobbies and interests directly onto the internet. Not the kind you see on social media, but the kind you see when you watch an episode of iCarly and you think to yourself, wow, a person sharing their weird interest in a decentralized platform they made themselves? That feels like a fantasy. Something about that resonated with me. As a YouTuber who thinks too highly about himself and his wastes of times, the fact that you can share whatever you want without any restrictions feels like a deal breaker. Going back to my love for writing stories, I came to understand that the reason why I like creative writing is because it gave me an avenue to express my ideas while making it fun and exciting. That's the magic that I am looking for whenever I want to pursue something. The bones of my love for creative writing is there in every website that I visited, turning initially boring interests into an artistic collage. And with that, I have finally found the goal that I was looking for. So I looked up online how I can get into this community, but I'm not just going to go back to using WordPress or some other website builder. After watching a few tutorials, I opened up Visual Studio Code and started learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Since I already have a mass media library of content under my YouTube channel, I wanted to improve upon the design and functionality of my previous website, and to do that, I had to say goodbye to website builders and learn how to code again. Initially, I thought that the process was going to be hard because unlike before, I had to learn 3 programming languages instead of 1. One is responsible for laying out the elements of my website, the other is responsible for its design, and the last one is responsible for adding dynamic action to it. However, I am no longer making code because other people found the action cool. I was doing it now because I finally found inherent value within myself to consider improving upon this skill. And there's also the notion that technically, HTML and CSS isn't really a programming language to begin with, according to most people because of how easily readable it is. So I'm technically learning only one, which is JavaScript. And even with all those factors, I can say that I had a better understanding of the code because of the lessons I have learned from my past mistakes of learning about Harvard's CS50 course, game engines, and the Blender Python API. Because of CS50, I already knew the nature of variables and conditional statements. Because of game engines, I knew that code does not need to be typed manually and you can just borrow code from a pre-existing library. Because of Blender Python API, I learned how to imagine code as an interconnected system of nodes that have an organized cause and effect system to them. None of my backlog of knowledge was wasted, and after writing multiple HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files, I finally made a NeoCities website. This, my friends, is the pinnacle of my coding journey. I took inspiration from colorful websites like Goblin Heart and went for a more colorful aesthetic while reusing assets I have made before. My homepage consists of music and art I want to boldly showcase to first-time visitors of my website, but it also consists of website-exclusive content not available on YouTube like a featured blog section, a chart listing my media tastes, and my website's magnum opus, a fake fortune teller program that can not only answer any yes or no question, but can also detect whether or not you have written a legible sentence. I went into more detail about each of the elements of my homepage by making separate web pages for them. This includes a page I created dedicated to sharing weird things I made using HTML and JavaScript, which includes a non-functioning guestbook, a tic-tac-toe minigame I copy-pasted from Geeks for Geeks, and a rock, paper, scissors minigame I created by myself. I can't say that I'm a master of coding. I still am trying to figure out how I can make an image slideshow for my art page, and I still have to fix the CSS of my coding page because oh boy, is this an eyesore. But I'm learning little by little, getting closer to understanding the potential of coding in my life. And since I dug myself into the Harvest Moon fandom, I wanted to research on making games again using JavaScript. I know this is the equivalent of using a hammer to loosen a screw, but with tutorials and play, I think I might be able to recreate simple games like the one in Friends of Middletown, wherein it is your job to feed chickens and keep them satisfied long enough before the time runs out. In other words, I am making my own Harvest Moon clone, and I'm coming for your position, Concerned Ape. Before making the script for this video, I wanted to end this video by giving a lesson about finding the right motivation. That people who pursue tasks does not do it for the people and instead does it because they find something inherently interesting or necessary about it. But now that we are at the end of this narrative, I came to realize that in the end, the vague and shallow mindset I had before making my website still helped me in the end to better understand free programming languages. I don't think anymore that my time learning CS50, game engines, and the Blender Python API was a waste of time. The mistakes I took from those experiences were actually stepping stones that made me better at what I am doing today. So to end the video, let us go back to the question at the start. How do you get someone into coding? The answer is anything. Make mistakes, be selfish, find something to brag about. You don't have to be the most moral or important person in the room to get into coding. Embrace your imperfections, because in the end, your flaws don't matter. What matters is not getting into it, finding the strength to continue, to improve, to discover something within yourself that you did not know that you have. This is the nature of learning, my dear viewers. I learned that we expect too much about ourselves in the start, that we give up too easily. We set big goals as if we are gods with unlimited power, time, and resources, and we strive to act like ones in hopes that we will eventually erase the person that we once were and become something different. But we know too much about ourselves, and reality can be too much of a pain to realize. But I remembered that I am not a wizard with powers that you see in fantasy books. I am still a student at the end of the day. Now go read a book.